Hey you guys, welcome to the JERKMONGER show, also my channel called Elliot Fernandez Art. One of the things I want to do as an element of my programming here is to do a little bit of I'm going to shed some light on this here, a little bit of a review of some of my favorite comic artists and some of the work that they did when I was coming up as an artist. Let me make adjustments here. So this is this particular video is going to be about John Buscema, Big John, at Marvel Comics back in the 70s and 80s. He had a huge influence on me. People have often asked me who my influences are. This is an opportunity to kind of share that with you guys. John had a huge influence on me, probably as early on involving some of those books like Avengers and Fantastic Four. I mean, he just did so much stuff when I was growing up. He even did some stuff in Spider-Man, but in particular Conan and Conan the Barbarian. That was some of the earliest comic work that I remember looking at. Savage Sword of Conan and his work in there. He had various inkers that would work with his stuff, and I wasn't crazy about all of them. But my favorite ones would include Bob McLeod and even Tom Palmer was probably my favorite of his inkers. But the best inker for him, in my opinion, was John himself. And this particular book, while it's not the first book I ever encountered, is very much an important document for me. It's like a textbook for me on John's work. This is double-sized annual, The Mighty Thor, number 13. So if you guys get a chance, you might want to go to your local comic shop and discover this on your own. Look in the back issue bins and try to find this issue. This thing's a treasure of artwork. So maybe it's not your style of art, because it is kind of, this is the same artist that wrote How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way with Stan Lee. That said, you might not dig that time and that era of artwork, but I'm telling you, there's stuff in here that you cannot resist as far as like lessons you can learn about telling stories and doing your comics. There's important elements in here. So first thing I want to note is the cover art. This is not John Buscema. This is probably going to be an artist I will tackle in future videos, Walter Simonson, who also had a tremendous impact on me. But John takes full control of this issue, this issue with his art right away in the first page. So we're going to talk about this stuff a little bit. I can't go through this without noting things like this. This is awesome, man. The Mask Team and Discover the Illusion. Join the Mask Team and Discover the Illusion. This was a great toy line. I miss toys. Toys were so important in my development, and I don't think people care about this stuff as much anymore. Maybe video games have replaced it, I guess. But anyway, as you can see here, the scripter here says Stanley presents and evil shall inherit. This is a story involving Mephisto and some of the mythology surrounding Thor and his universe. Alan Zelenet's scripter, John Buscema's artist. Notice that he's labeled as the artist. He's not penciler and somebody else is the inker. He did the whole thing. So this was an important issue. This is why I bring it here, because I have plenty of other books that cover, sorry about the phone call, that cover prior versions of his art, but this particular one was the one that had captured my imagination the most. John Morelli is the letterer in this book, and by the way, he did a great job in this. George Roussos is the colorist. Ralph Macchio at the time was the editor, and Jim Shooter was editor-in-chief. This was like a super important time in comics, in Marvel Comics history. This was the best. So we start off this issue as we talk about, well, I want to just go back to that page. Look at this, how John uses the shadow of Mephisto and some poor soul here, a female soul, already using some sex appeal in the artwork. Look how he uses this black ink to kind of guide your eye from the top left to the bottom right. This is, of course, a particular method of reading in the West, so we are not offended by this and by any stretch of the imagination. This is certainly important, how we go from top left to bottom right. This is how we read in America and the West and other Western countries. So this is captured right here. Give me a second. I'm going to turn off my phone because I don't want to get interrupted again. Let's see here. Just make sure. I have a tendency to do this at the wrong time. I apologize to all you guys. Just don't want to be interrupted. I want to keep this here flowing. And I want to keep this one short too, by the way. I just want to do a review of some of my favorite artists and why I love them. So, by the way, some of these things I'm talking about as far as the spotting of black did not come into play for me until years later as I started to do my own comic art, and I started to really appreciate how to create flow in my composition and in art. So if you're a young comic artist and you're trying to get a grasp of what this all means, take great note here. Look how everything in this image serves the purpose of telling a story and leading the reader across pages to get to the next page, and even from panel to panel. But since this is a still shot, you know, it's a full page illustration, you can see here how the bulk of all the black is so striking. It's right here in front. Now the colorist did a good job of kind of adding to this the purple hue here to kind of help guide your eye to this right here. This is the most important part of this thing, not just the art, but the story, the title, and evil shall inherit. So everything's kind of leading your eye to this spot. Even this puff of smoke draws you into the image. So this is really important because a lot of times artists will start to draw something and they're not really serving the purpose of the drawing, of the goal in the artwork. They're just drawing. And here you can see John has kind of incorporated elements that will draw your eye. Look at how there's black little spots here that are obviously crevices in the rock. They kind of lead your eye into this image. So everything's kind of pointing into the bulk of the image. This here, now if this were not colored, it would still work, but the colorist enhanced it further by bringing purple, a darker color than the background. And I love the way that we used to do comics in the old days where this was all pink and this was all purple. Like what gets colored that way in real life? Nothing. And that's why I love this stuff. It used the imagination. Anyway, inside the shadow, you can see the true nature of what's going on in these cracks. It's like lava or something. This is clearly hell. And well, this character is Mephisto, who is kind of like Mephistopheles, an interpretation of the devil. And so, probably not the same devil, but you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, look how everything points to this thing. So in this case, this is called graphic design, okay? John Buscema was not just a comic artist. In fact, he really didn't, according to the things I've read and the interviews I've heard, he wasn't really that big on comic books. He came from the advertising world. And so his main focus was graphic design. And so here you can see everything that's happening in the figure work is pointing. Even her arm points down. Look at the little finger right there. It's like like she's pointing to Stanley Presents and the Evil Shall Inherit. All the artwork, the color is pointing to this title. So this is where type is. This is called type as art. So this is an element of the art. This is just a graphic element within these other graphic elements. I want to also point out that not everything that action in the story is not necessarily the same as is not necessarily important as composition, although the action in the artwork can contribute to the composition, and we're going to go over that in a few minutes. But anyway, so everything here, even the guy getting strangled, you focus on his head and you kind of follow his body, and there's a shadow. So everything John has drawn here, from this blast of light coming from here, which has some shadow coming in like a speed lines or whatever, they're pointing into the image. So if you're coming in from here, you follow it into the word bubble. So even the word bubbles are used as graphic elements, pointing into the action, into the stuff. This points you into Mephisto, who's clearly the lead person speaking. Well, this person isn't even speaking at all, but leads you across the body and down to the type. If you follow his, if your eye travels along the black shape, which also works, it leads you right into this, and even this rock becomes a little arrow. So I can almost point arrows all over the page, pointing to this type. Okay, so that's super important. That's super important. Just here on this money shot, this splash page. Into the next page here, we got Mephisto standing hardcore, and he just tosses that poor soul into the depths of hell. Look at that. But notice that as you enter in with the black shapes. This is known as spotting your blacks. And you enter into the panels with this black shapes, and you follow all the black shapes. So everything that's happening in this panel is contributing to the flow, the course that your eye should follow in terms of the artwork. It's not arbitrary, and that's one of the big mistakes that young artists make often is they draw arbitrarily. I do it. I've done it too. I still do it from time to time because sometimes I'll forget. I'll get caught up in drawing a figure. I like the figure so much that I want to keep the figure drawn. But if the figure is drawn in such a way that it doesn't serve the purpose of leading your eye across, then what's the point? So let's start here. We follow him down, and you can almost follow his body position here. You follow the black either down his back or down his arm. Either way, it's like a waterfall of light and shadow dropping down into this flame. This flame purposefully is curved in. You see this? This is not arbitrary. You can't just draw whatever and expect your eye to flow. This element in the foreground also pointing down. Why is this? Because we want to get you across. Now this is an odd layout that can be tricky because there's only 3 panels and this one's long. So it's much more challenging to lead your eye down and then back up to the next panel, which is what he wants to do. But he does it pretty well. So he brings your eye across, and these licks of flame help to bring your eye back up. So you can almost follow the pathway here, and this acts as an arrow pointing here. The light, the smoke comes across his face to lead your eye across. Now, of course, again, we're reading top left to bottom right, so this is going to be read this way, but that's a necessary challenge there for the letterer. It's not going to always work perfectly, but as far as the art is concerned, bear in mind, look how much space John has left for the letterer to include dialogue and such. So that's important, the word balloons. So this light comes across, and you just follow the shadows down. It's just so perfect. The light brings you up, and where it ends, it leads you to this big black shape. So there's a big white shape, big black shape, and you just follow that all the way down of ink, and literally creates a little arrow here. These are all important tools that you have as a penciler / inker that is critical in telling your story. Now, it's not just telling a story. You know, John woke up, went out to the store, got punched in the head by a criminal, and kept moving. That's a story, but how you tell that story, this is called sequential storytelling, okay? So this is how you do it sequentially. One is the issue of the passage of time, which is spoken or discussed very well by Scott McCloud in his book, How to Make Reinventing Comics and such, or Making Comics. But even here, you can kind of see that there's an idea of you want to create these little patterns and arrows that lead you across the page. So here, while you come down here, back to left to right, this column of bodies and souls brings you across, and this flame here creates the arrow that points you up again. John Buscema was a master. By every description of that term, he is, or every definition of that term, he is a master. So again, the cape is not arbitrary. It is used as a graphic device. If you were to take all this information, this would be an arrow pointing down and an arrow pointing up. He serves his black shapes point as arrows down to lead you back to this flame, because this flame is what's going to carry your eye across to the next panel. This is when it's done well. Doesn't mean that other comics that are good, are done, or can't work. It's just that this is how you know that someone's at the top of their game, and John was always at the top of his game, unless he was sleepy. That's different. But anyway, so you come down here, and here the letterer takes opportunity to assist the arrow because it's leading you down here. So this is not the perfect thing, but maybe John planned for this word bubble to be here to drag your eye across. So who knows how much of this was designed by John with the letterer in mind. He may have, because a lot of times comic artists back then, pencilers would plan where those word balloons would fall, so it would help create some of the flow. So here, if this is where you have to really feel the whole thing. The whole thing is like a very important work of art. Everybody's working together in tandem to create this masterpiece. So he brings you into here. The shadows bring you across. Again, here are some more arrows. I can do this all day, but I want to go to another thing that's fun. This is basic, your composition and your layout, your spotting of blacks. That's important. Also notice, just for fun, man, look how beautiful his inks are. Look at the beautiful brush strokes. Everything creating texture and mass and volume. Like, this feels like a real foot. Other people might just draw a couple of lines and bink, bink. I do that pretty much. I don't spend this much energy on these things, but that's for different reasons. But anyway, I just love this. I just love this. This brings you down to the character. The shadow brings you across. So there's always something. Either it's the shadows pointing to it, the lights pointing to it. When the master is doing it right, everything leads. Because this creates a swoop. This creates a fall. This falls and swoops back up. And then even this rock is laid out so that it can draw your eye across and off the page. I also love this. I love how the letterer took the negative space here. I love that in older comics, there wasn't always an overload of information on every panel of detail. That's not how we see real life. I mean, oftentimes, if you were to take a snapshot of to glance, I don't know, if you're in an office building, you might only focus on one person in one cubicle, and that's all you really need is that little space, and everything else is blurred. I think that's what's created here. It also creates drama because he's so dark, and the colors help to pop him off the white background that becomes the singular focus. I'd hate to include some little rocks and bugs over here, and you lose the point of this, the drama of this figure, Mephisto, sitting on his throne in hell. And this looks terrifying to me. So, again, I'm not afraid of it. I'm just saying that's the way you tell that story. Here, employing some of the same tools. Literally, this little patch of color draws you down. This little patch of all these little arrows. Look at the arrow. Arrow comes across, right? But one of my favorite panels here is this one. I'm going to skip a couple pages to this. This is where I want to talk a little bit about John as just a fantastic illustrator. Just crazy good. I mean, aside from all the arrows, you can see this one double page spread here. Look at all this flowing. Everything's flowing, and it's almost creating a circle. This is also, I meant to say this in the beginning, one of the things I love about John. John was to me what Frank Frazetta was to fantasy art, and John just turned it into comic art, and I think that's why I love him so much. I love both those artists. I'm going to eventually want to do a study of Frank Frazetta's work as well. But look how he lays out his composition. I can't stop thinking about that because graphic design is so important in telling stories. If you don't keep that in mind, you're just drawing arbitrary images. But everything needs to serve the purpose of your story and drive your eye across the images that are necessary. Because in this story, in this image here, there's a narrative going on. Ulick is the slave master, and these are the slaves all working in the mines. And so the composition draws your eye, not just graphically, but it gives you an opportunity to focus in on these individual elements. And notice how the arrows still continue. This brings you down. See his figure, his body language here is drawing your eye down. The flame draws you across. I mean, literally, it's like a bridge that brings you across to the next page. Literally. Well, not literally, this isn't a bridge, but you see what I'm saying? It's almost like a bridge. Even if you end up here, if your eye lingers this way, look how the blocks lead you into this little story going on here. These three guys carrying a bunch of weapons. This guy here is holding this stuff. And guess what happens? These things serve as arrows. They point right up to this guy, which brings you across here, which brings you across over here. If you follow this all the way to these guys follow the pathway across this way. See how he's kind of curved? This little thing right here is not arbitrary. This is so that if you end up this direction, this guy's weapon or pick or whatever that is pointing you to this fountain thing, this I don't know what to call that. This vessel that holds all this molten stuff, and is pouring down. The smoke brings you across, so that if you follow this pathway, you see another story here. But notice that everything's flowing, everything's fluid. Really great composition. This is a master at work. But let's not talk about that right now. Let's talk about how awesome this figure work is. Look how gorgeous this is. And notice that, and this is something I gotta deal with. Notice how he doesn't draw every striation of the muscle. He just hints at the general form. So he's creating volume. This is a chunk of flesh, and he's doing it through fur. So it's even smarter. He's using this particular texture of this hatching texture to give that form. and it's all over the place. So it complements the fur coming off of the figure. Also notice that it's dark on the top and dark on the bottom, almost creating some weird lighting in the middle. So that's helpful to create volume as well. There's a shadow on the edge, shadow on the edge. The interior is lit just on this arm alone. But light is still coming down from above. So when you hit the top surface of his thigh, and this is a tricky one, because you can see that the knee is poking at us. It's pointing to the reader. So his hip is behind this leg, okay? A lot of people will just think of it as flat. Oh, this is just a flat muscle. I have a tendency to do that myself because I'm not thinking in 3D. You've got to rearrange your thinking into 3D. You can see this here is lit from above, and this leg must be curved in or under his thigh, because guess what? The shin here is covered in black. So this is the shadow. So you see that? And this shadow meets this shadow, which leads you to this bright spot, which leads you back over. This is brilliant, right? The whip. See how it draws your eye across? You just can't help it. You can if you go this direction or if you go this direction, either way, you're swirling around this thing and you're captivated and captured into this image. You're captured in this thing is holding you captive, I should say. Again, look at this face. I draw, if you know my work at all, you've probably seen this type of thing. I'm very influenced by Buscema. The Roman nose of Buscema was always a big deal to me. It just felt real. I don't know why. I think it was because at the time, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, a lot of television actors had these type of proportions in their face. Today, they're a little bit more softer, but back then, a man looked like a man. It was very, very, very masculine features on a gentleman. So that was a prominent look. Same with women. You know, I could tell in John Buscema's case, his women had a tendency to look very, look at this. Even this art in this advertisement for Marvel cartoons had a bit of a John Buscema look to it. Isn't that crazy? I love it. I love it, man. John had this whole thing wrapped up. There's not a lot of females in this story, if I remember correctly. Look at this inking, man. Look at that. Look how gorgeous he creates the volume in the face. That's what I aspire to. I aspire to doing stuff like that. Maybe it's an old-fashioned way of telling stories and drawing, but it's still a big deal to me. Look at that awesome face. How realistic it is without all the detail that I would normally put in something of my own. Don't get me wrong. I like texture and such, but look at Sif. So this is what I mean. It's hard to see. Probably can't see this really well, but this is what I mean when I say that John Buscema reminds me so much of Frazetta. Let me go back to the beginning when there was that poor soul getting launched into the flames. Look at the hips on her, the voluptuousness of her breasts, and when she's getting tossed into the flames, she looks just thick legs. This was a very Frank Frazetta physique. It's ironic that some people today are so worried about the way that their body looks, and no one wants to see that sort of stuff anymore. But in my community, coming from the Puerto Rican Latino community, those are our women. They have those kinds of proportions. Very interesting. Nice mix of all kinds of cultures in one. But anyway, very, very interesting stuff, man. I hope you guys are digging this. This is John Buscema at his finest, in my opinion. This is one of the best works he ever did, and I would challenge anyone to argue that. Not sure if this is your cup of tea, but if you are interested in learning about, he may not inspire you from an aesthetic place on how to draw the figure or how to draw faces, but I cannot emphasize enough the importance of storytelling and leading the eye across in composition. That's his currency in this. If there's nothing else, if you get nothing else from this conversation, fall in love with this guy's ability to lead your eye using composition, using black and using white. That is premium, you know. Well, anyway, guys, I figured this would be a great way to kind of introduce you guys to some of my influences, and also to talk about my knowledge of telling stories and drawing in general, where I get all my information from. Hopefully you guys get something out of this. This was the Mighty Thor double size annual number 13. Give it a look, guys. This was good stuff. It's probably inexpensive in the back issue somewhere. You could probably get it a beat up copy. Just keep it in your back pocket for a while, just to review often if you want to figure out how to tell stories better. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you all hanging out with me. Next time, maybe I'll go over Walter Simonson, who was another big influence on me, and I'll tell you a story about him. But in the meantime, you guys have a great day. God bless you guys, and keep drawing. Till next time.